advanced framing is about is, generally speaking, the way buildings are framed relies on doing some things that are just sort of things we all learned how to do from our dads, and there are sticks in buildings or framing members in buildings that don't really serve any purpose, and we just put them in there because we've always put them in there. So the idea of advanced framing is to take a fresh look at how we frame a building and all the pieces that are in it, and whether or not they're really necessary. And the reason we're doing that is because we're trying to create the conditions, number one, where there's less framing and consequently more room for insulation, and number two, in areas where in the past we might have created voids that can't be insulated, we want to get rid of all those. So in normal construction, the way it works is you frame the house, and then after you're done with that and after you've done the wiring and plumbing, the insulator comes. And if there are places that you've put so much wood in that the insulator can't get in there to insulate, those places are going to stay voids forever. So those diminishing the amount of wood and not creating those voids are the two things that we're after when we talk about advanced framing. So anybody can do this. What you need to do is you need to have a structural engineer that understands what your objectives are and that he's willing to help you by designing the building, doing the engineering so that you can use these techniques. Now there are several techniques that we use to drive down the amount of lumber that we're using. There's things like just diminishing the amount of lumber we use to frame around windows. There's different ways we treat the corners so that they're more open and we're using less lumber. There's different ways that we deal with the partitions, which is the area where an interior wall meets an exterior wall. And we change, when possible, we change the frequency that we put the lumber in. So it's typical to use 16 inches on center. There are many times when we can go to 24 inches on center. So all these things are subsets or components of advanced framing. So the objective of doing these advanced framing techniques is to drive down the amount of lumber we're actually using to frame these different assemblies. And sort of a metric we use is that in a conventionally framed building, sort of on aggregate, you're going to have about a 25 or 30% framing factor, and that means of the area of the exterior walls, 25 or 30% of that is actually going to be filled up with wood. So what we're trying to do as a result of all this all these different techniques is we're trying to drive down the percentage of the exterior walls that are filled up with wood. And by employing all these techniques, it's possible to get down to maybe 15% framing factor, which is actually a third less sticks. So all that exterior space gets to be filled up with, that extra space gets to be filled up with insulation, and also we're creating less voids, so we're making sure that we're getting insulation in every little place. Now, this positively affects the thermal performance of the building, but the other thing that it does is it's quite a significant cost savings. On the certified passive houses that I've built so far, I'm finding that it's driving down the framing budget by about 20%, and that's simply because you're buying less material and you're cutting and installing less material. So that's been my experience so far.